Well, welcome everybody. There are a few of you online. Hopefully a few more of us will come on board in the next few minutes, but I promised that we would start this at noon Eastern time anyway. So we're going to get started. So just a few housekeeping things first up front. Let me just tell you welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about fueling fitness, creating sustainable health goals. I'm Michele Tuttle. I am going to be your host today. I happen to be a Team USA amateur elite triathlete. I'm also a certified specialist in sports dietetics. I've been a dietitian for a long time. I also happen to be a coach, a U.S. Masters swim coach, and I coach triathletes on a regular basis. So I'm really pleased to be here today. And before I get into today's webinar, I do want to also thank our sponsor, the Wheat Foods Council. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Wheat Foods Council, so let me just say they are a nonprofit organization formed about 50 years ago. And the whole purpose that they have is to help educate people about the value of grains, carbohydrates, fiber, and all three of those components as part of a healthful diet. So I am going to be talking a little bit about wheat today, just a little heads up, but we're going to be talking about a lot of other things as well. If you're not familiar with the Wheat Foods Council, I would strongly recommend you go visit their website at wheatfoods.org and see what they've got on offer in terms of educational materials, infographics, recipes, videos, you name it, there's a lot. And I'm proud to say that I've also been been a large part of developing or working with the developers of that material. So, all right, enough said there. Let's talk about fueling fitness and creating sustainable health goals. And one of the things I want to start right out by saying is that I think there are really some serious challenges that personal trainers face, or anyone dealing with clients who are coming to you with big health goals, whether they're trying to improve the health, their own health, their fitness, their nutrition, their eating style, etc., whatever they're trying to do. They come to you with these huge challenges. Maybe they haven't been able to meet their goals. Perhaps they need support. There's a variety of reasons. But in any case, they come to you with these big goals. And part of what you have to do, and part of what I have to do as a dietitian, is basically help clients meet these really big goals. And one of the first things that I often have to do is make sure that they're setting the right kinds of goals. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. And part of that is also knowing that there are going to be barriers to these goals. Big barriers are going to come up, obstacles. No one ever just, sets a goal and just cruises right onto it. Well, maybe a few people do. Most of us do not. So that said, how we handle those barriers and those obstacles really dictates whether we're going to meet those big goals. So in any case, I'm going to be talking about a lot of these things. I also want to say that on the Wheat Foods site, you may find some handouts that are helpful, and I'll try to remember to remind you to direct those to you. But one of them is the athlete's plate, and I'll be talking about that shortly. Okay, so let's get started. We have a lot to cover, and I only have a short while to do it. So, all right. I think most of you, being trainers working in the fitness world or the nutrition world, are probably familiar with SMART goals. Nearly everyone who's out there who blogs about goals or talks about this refers to the SMART framework, okay, that goals have to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. Well, that's great. I'm here to say that that's all wonderful, and I'm sure you all know how to do those specifics. But the thing that I'm here to say is that I don't know that SMART goals always work. Okay, I actually am somebody who thinks that where we tend to stumble is on the achievable and the realistic. And here's what happens. Let's say that, clients can have all those things spelled out, specific, measurable, et cetera, time bound. But if they're not actually an achievable goal or realistic for the client's given circumstances, it isn't going to work. It doesn't matter how well they've met these parameters, right? I mean, that's just what happens. So let me give you an example. If a client comes to you and says, I'm really trying to lose that 30 pounds, that 50 pounds, whatever it is, or I'm, what it might be a nutrition goal, it might be a fitness goal, or maybe they want to look a certain way. My first concern is we have to actually ask, is this really achievable given this person's particular set of circumstances and, knowledge and their skill set and all kinds of things. So the other thing is it actually controllable? This is a question I raise all the time because we have this assumption as health professionals and fitness professionals that, okay, if we eat a certain amount of calories and we exercise a certain amount of time, then we are going to automatically achieve set body composition and this kind of look. And I'm here to say that I don't know about you, but in my experience, those are not controllable. We can, if we're really on it, we can control whether we work out, and we can control perhaps kind of the style of eating that we do. But over a long period of time, we are not going to be successful if we are trying to achieve a certain way we want our body to look, or if we're trying to restrict our food intake too much. Okay? Fails every time. In fact, I would argue that food restriction is probably one of the biggest problems out there in terms of why people don't meet their goals. Okay? We can't really control that as much as we think we can. But one thing we can control is processes. If clients if they focus instead on the processes that are going to get them to their goals, they do get there over time. They may not get perfectly where they want it to be, but they get a heck of a lot closer. So I'm here to say that if we can focus on process over time, that's going to equal change. All right, let's get into a little bit of specifics about that. All right, so first of all, what do we mean by processes? Okay, I'm not saying, so let's say that the client really, if they want to do this healthy eating thing, they want to improve their fitness. And I'm here to say then we have to work on the habits that are behind that, the processes. So let me give you an example. Let's say that we want an outcome of better nutrient status. We want people to get all the nutrients they need, and we want them to achieve weight balance and stability, okay, in their weight. Well, then the first step is they actually have to eat regularly, not when they're starving, and they have to do it again and again and again, consistently. They've got a grocery shop. They got to plan their weekly meals. Okay, if we hope that they're going to exercise, they got to pack their gym bag the night before. Those are processes that have to happen, are very controllable. And if they're done over time, they will lead to these outcomes on the other side of the chart. Okay, so because I know, many of you probably face what I do all the time. People have these huge goals. And the people make resolutions, stuff just doesn't stick. And why doesn't it stick? Because it's really about these small habits that people have to develop and work on for a long time before you see the outcome. And when people are trying to get to stuff very quickly, it just fails outright because they don't get there fast enough. So we'll talk a little bit about how do you keep people on track so that they understand the most important thing you can do is stay the course, okay? So, but in my mind, one of the reasons that goals fail in a major way is because people focus on the uncontrollable parts of things. As I said, I don't personally believe that you can control your food intake and even the way your body is going to respond to exercise. You can do the exercise, you can try to master a certain caloric intake, but you are just simply not guaranteed what that's going to look like in the end or how it's going to affect the rest of your health and particularly just your mindset about the whole thing. All right, so let's move on. What do we do instead? Well, first of all, if we're setting goals, the first thing we need to know, especially if we're going to be talking about goals related to our clients' healthy eating habits, is we need to talk about a little bit about nutrition needs. And I emphasize that word because I hear from a lot of people things like certain aspects of the diet are not necessary. And I'm kind of always a little surprised about that because in my mind, all of these things are a very important part of everyone's plate, not just athletes, but everyone. We do need enough calories. We need enough carbohydrates. We need protein. We need fats. We need vitamins and minerals. Okay. And let me just mention a little bit about here. Calories. You all know this, I'm sure. Calories come from 4 sources. We've got, alcohol, believe it or not, nobody ever talks about that one. We've got fat, we've got carbohydrate, and we've got protein. For some reason, we often talk about carbohydrate calories and alcohol calories as expendable. The alcohol I can see a case for, obviously. The carbohydrates, not so much, and I'm going to go through why I don't think that that's possible. The other thing is to understand about all of these sources of fuel. I don't care whether it's alcohol, carbohydrate, protein, fat. They're all going toward the same goal of trying to provide the body with glucose, which is the primary fuel that we run on. That is not going to change. That is what the brain runs on. Everything we eat is converted to that in one way, shape, or form. And if we don't need it because our calorie needs, we're eating more than what we need calorically, it's going to be basically converted to fat. Okay, the exception is alcohol. We have to burn that right up. We don't have a way to store that. We just burn it, and then we'll use the other calories that are around. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about carbohydrates and why I think they're important. First of all, energy. Okay, this is what provides the basic energy of the body, most direct route. Recovery. For anyone doing workouts, this is how you refuel the muscles with glycogen so they can do the next workout and feel decent. Sustained energy, okay? They just last, they're there. And performance for athletes, they're critical. That's been shown in the research. You cannot perform, especially as an endurance athlete, without a steady supply of carbohydrate to the body. And mood, let's talk a little bit about that. Ever talk to anybody who's been on a low carb plan for a long time? Sometimes they feel great initially, but long term, not so much. There's a lot of tie-in between the gut and serotonin and the mind. So enough said on that. That could be a webinar in and of itself. Of course, just a word about protein. Of course, that's necessary. We know this. I think it gets a little too much play these days in the nutrition talk. First of all, we all have needs. And for the most part in the United States, most of us are meeting those needs quite well. We are not protein deficient. We can only absorb about 20 to 30 grams at a sitting. You need a certain amount of time to absorb it, digest it, and if we eat it in excess, it's also converted to glucose and then to fat if we don't need it. And fats also, again, some people would say that those are optional. Well, we need fats. They not only help us, our immune system operate the way it should, they're an efficient fuel source as in and of themselves in terms of storing calories, and they also help us absorb vitamins A, D, and E, the fat-soluble ones. We need fat. Don't be fooled there. Okay, fooled there. They're all necessary. Okay, not to mention vitamins and minerals. I don't think I need to stress their importance. But let me give you just one quick example. When someone, those are the nutrients we need. And then on the plate, you can see the food groups we need. And some people would argue, okay, I don't need those grains. I don't need that dairy. I don't need this. I just need these fruits and vegetables, maybe this protein. Well, if we eliminate dairy, okay, got it. You eliminate basically the primary source of calcium in your diet. Yes, I know some greens have calcium. It's tied up in the in the phytates. It's hard to absorb. So bottom line is one of the most absorbable sources of calcium that we have on a regular basis comes from dairy products. If we don't eat those, we need to replace that dairy. The calcium, primarily, there are many other nutrients involved in dairy. What I see in my practice, especially in young athletes, is stress fractures. It's not a matter of if, it's when. If there is no calcium in the diet and they are doing certain forms of training, they are going to stress fracture. Okay. Let me give you another one. Let's say you happen to be, again, a female, young female, childbearing age, whatever you want to say it. Lots of young women are just on the borderline of anemia, many of them not getting adequate iron intake. And for them, red meat, something which others often cut out of the diet, is kind of necessary or very helpful. Let's put it that way, helpful to their iron status. So we get into trouble when we eliminate things. It's just my point there. It's important that you identify carefully that most of the things on that plate are actually necessary. So cutting something out is not really a great way to go. That said, optimizing your carbohydrates is a good idea. By optimizing, what do I mean? Well, first of all, one thing to recognize is that nearly all the food groups, everything I've got listed there, provides a form of carbohydrate, okay? It's not just coming from the grains and starches. It's also coming from fruits and vegetables. It's coming from milk in form of lactose. It's coming from beans. It's coming from nuts and seeds. All of these supply carbohydrates. But some of these carbohydrates have more nutrients than others. And obviously, if you can eat or consume a wider variety of carbohydrates, you're going to get a wider variety of nutrients. One of the things that I get a little peeved about sometimes is that we're so obsessed with eliminating things from our diet, we forget that we actually need to include a lot. And if we have a wide array of different carbohydrates, we're going to get a wide array of nutrients. So nutrient-dense meals are where it's at. Let me give you just a little example. First of all, let's talk a bit about something like cereal and milk. I know you're going to immediately say, wait a minute, that's too high in sugar. Is it? Depends on the cereal that you pick. What about cereal and milk with toast and fruit and yogurt? I could do a whole laundry list of nutrients that come out of that. How about something like, before a workout, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Okay, how many clients have you had who show up in the evening and they have not eaten yet that day? How the heck are they supposed to do a decent workout if they haven't even had anything to eat? And probably the simplest meal you could throw at your body, it would be peanut butter and jelly. And you want to optimize it, maybe whole wheat bread. But anything is going to be better than not eating at all throughout the day. And if it's good enough for the NBA, I think it's probably good enough for us. Anyway, what about something like tortillas, refried beans, etc., with guac and cheese? What I'm trying to say here, no one eats any of these carbohydrates alone. They're always in the context, usually, of a meal with other foods combined with other things. And when you think about that, that is a lot of complementary nutrient happening and a lot of things that are coming along with those carbohydrates that are apparently optional. So in my mind, carbs aren't optional. They are the basis of every meal. And that's not just because I happen to be a triathlete. I think that I would argue with anyone. I do not put protein at the center of the plate and put the carbohydrates at the center of the plate. The protein still remains there, but it has its place, as do the fruits and vegetables. Okay, moving on. Let's talk a little bit more about this because I know I'm going to get some questions about this, and I hope you will question me about this, okay? Especially if this is not what you believe to be true about carbohydrates in the diet, okay? First, a little bit about carbohydrate metabolism, okay? There are 3 types. Hopefully you know this. There are complex carbohydrates, which are the starches. There are sugars like glucose, fructose, lactose, and all kinds of little combinations of those. And then there is fiber. These are 3 very important types of carbohydrates. The complex carbs we absorb more slowly, the sugars quickly, fiber. Now here's something interesting. Fiber is something that none of us get enough of, that we all desperately need, and it provides 0 calories. So why doesn't anybody eat fiber? Well, number 1, it's chewy. Number 2, it can basically cause digestive symptoms that you're not used to because you're not used to eating fiber. But what they do is they feed probably one of the most important elements of your body. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, okay? The microbiome. All right, let's talk a little bit about what happens when we eat carbohydrates in terms of timing. First of all carbohydrates provide energy that's easy to use. Okay, we've talked about this, but timing matters. If you're one of those people who waits until 7 p.m. at night to do all of your eating, it doesn't matter, carb, protein, whatever, that's not when you're using your calories. Food needs to come along at the time of day that we're actually using it. There are exceptions to this, of course. Nobody wants to eat right before a strenuous workout, but eating in advance of that workout, an hour and a half or so, that's wise, because otherwise you're just not going to feel that great. Okay, people who move a lot during the day, physically during their jobs, think, construction, someone who's on their feet all the time, they're going to need more carbohydrates than others because they need more calories. All right. Carbohydrates that are not used immediately, this should not surprise you, are stored first as glycogen in your muscles and your liver, then as fat. And actually, it doesn't matter whether you're eating excess protein, excess fat, everything becomes fat if it's too much for your body. Okay, that's how it goes for the most part. Now, so we do need to eat at the right time of day. Eating at night and is going to cause, when you're not really using it, is going to cause insulin spikes. It is going to cause, health matters that aren't great, more fat storage, etc. All right. So we don't want to do our eating at night. We want to do our eating during the day. And I know you're going to get all the same excuses from people that I get. I don't have time during the day. My job is so busy. I don't have time. I'm not hungry. You know what? I think people need to really think hard about that, because it really matters what time of day you eat. That doesn't mean that all of your eating should be done before 7 o'clock, but you should be fueling yourself throughout the day. All right. Now, so when we don't have enough carb in the diet, we definitely end up with things like feeling horrible during workouts, not recovering well from workouts. Sometimes people don't sleep that well. It depends. All right. And the other thing I will say, though, is, of course, there are a lot of people out there who have success with limiting carbohydrates in terms of cutting, if they happen to be a bodybuilding athlete, or, if they're doing extreme dieting because that's what they do. But over the long term, cutting carbohydrates out of the diet entirely is simply not sustainable, not recommended health-wise. I think I've already talked about this. I'm going to mention it again. Higher protein, even with fruits and vegetables, can be constipating. It turns out that one of the biggest sources of fiber in our diet comes from the carbohydrates that we eat or don't eat. So you're probably going to be on a low fiber diet automatically if you're on a high protein, low carbohydrate diet, which doesn't feel that great. And we can only absorb so much of that protein at once. And the bottom line is we get a lot of B vitamins, we get iron and folate and other nutrients from foods that contain, believe it or not, enriched flour. Okay. And of course, whole wheat flour has its own benefits. Also, same nutrients, but extra fiber. It's great. The other thing I'm going to say about carbohydrates is that it can be really hard to create meals if you're not including the carbohydrates. It can be done, of course. And there are people who need to eliminate all wheat products, and for whatever reason, carbohydrates just aren't their friend. But it's trickier. And that in and of itself is hard. Just struggling to decide what to eat every day can be problematic. All right, finally, let's talk a little bit about this microbiome. The bacteria in your lower GI tract are probably the most important things in your body in terms of providing you with nutrients. We never think about it that way. We always think that we are eating a food, that our enzymes, digestive processes break it down, and we absorb those vitamins and minerals, etc. To some extent, yeah, okay. But the part that we don't have the enzymes for, the carbohydrates, the fiber that we don't get to, the microbiome digests. They produce other nutrients that, not calories, but other factors that we absorb that are just as important for health. And we're at the very edge of understanding that. All we know right now is that when we don't feed that microbiome well with carbohydrates and fiber, we don't do very well. So That's a whole webinar in and of itself, and we actually have one. There is one of those on the Wheat Foods Council if you'd like to hear more about that. All right, moving on. Okay, quickly, let me tell you a little bit about wheat because it's kind of interesting and a lot of people don't know this stuff. All right, so there is a reason wheat is one of the predominant carbohydrate in the U.S. diet and in a lot of societies around the world. Why is this? Well, first of all, wheat supports and has many of the nutrients that we need: calories, protein, fiber, thiamine, iron, magnesium, zinc, and in the case of enriched flour, folate. Okay, 10,000 years of cultivation, pretty much it works. It's been grown in many parts of the world, and where it's been grown, societies have grown. All right, as a grain, it's easily stored, transported around the world. It's a flexible food. That's why it's so popular. You can basically meld it into a whole bunch of different things. And we should talk a little bit about cost because it's not as expensive, say, to both the environment and to your pocketbook as protein is. All right. So bottom line is nutritious, flexible, sustainable, and affordable. Those are probably good things in its favor. Let's talk a little bit about the nutrition impact. So I think I mentioned this before, but I'm going to say it again. People do not eat carbohydrates or foods even usually in isolation. It's like no one goes out there and says, hey, I'm just craving a cup of flour. It just doesn't happen. We don't eat wheat usually by itself or flour by itself. Of course, it's wheat, the grain is milled and turned into other products. But let's talk a little bit about what wheat just on its own provides nutritionally, and then we'll talk about what happens when you combine it with other foods. All right, so a little bit first about whole wheat, okay? The one that that is the favorite child sometimes. All right, whole wheat has, of course, energy meaning calories, and from carbohydrates primarily, but also from some fats and protein. You know that thing everybody was saying we should not eat a few years back? I hope we're off this by now. The gluten. Gluten is the protein of wheat. So there is gluten in wheat, and it is a protein, and it's significant. There's also B vitamins in wheat. There's fiber. There's iron. There's zinc and phytonutrients that, again, the microbiome helps us out with. It turns out that actually whole wheat and whole grains in particular are probably more protective against heart disease than fruits and vegetables. That research is also out there. Also protective against diabetes. Something to understand that just on its own, wheat is actually a pretty good deal nutritionally. All right, now, of course, in the US, most of our consumption is from enriched wheat. So let's talk a little bit about that. Enriched wheat is milled, meaning they take the grain, they remove the bran and the endosperm, which has the fat and tends to make the wheat spoil just a little bit. There's still the carbohydrate, there's still the protein. And to make sure that the wheat is still going to provide the nutrients that it should, the B vitamins, some B vitamins are added back, iron is added. And another one that is not naturally in wheat, but is really critical to health, and that's folate. Folate is something that until 1998 was not added to flour. And it was added to flour because it was recognized that if we could up the folate intake of the entire population in the US, we would dramatically drop the rate of birth defects from spina bifida. So, neural tube defects, basically. So, effectively, that one change, adding folate to flour, had a dramatic drop. There were, the statistics are there. I will let you find them, but that was pretty significant. So both whole wheat, enriched wheat on their own provide a lot of nutrients. Now, let's think about what happens though. Again, we don't eat these things alone. We always eat bread with other things involved. We add bread to meals. We have pasta with sauces and vegetables and other meat products added. We have tortillas with beans. We have sandwiches with meat, cheese, vegetable. So all of a sudden, this basic carbohydrate becomes a background, if you will, for eating all the other food groups, including, the meat and beans group, the fruit vegetable group, as well as the dairy group. All of these groups are important. So having a way to deliciously and easily get them into our body is a good thing from what I can tell. That's not to say, okay, enough said. Let's move on. All right. We've talked about carbohydrates. I wanted to do that diversion just to kind of confirm that we need a lot of different things in our diet. So it doesn't, if our goal is to eat healthfully and get fit, we actually have to include those things that are going to provide our body with what it needs. Okay. I could do an entire presentation on why excessive calorie cutting is not going to get anyone there. Small changes get people to where they need to be. But if they're going to get to those small changes, we got to focus on the processes, as I talked about earlier. And step 3 is understanding or figuring out, do your clients actually have the skills and tools they need to get where they're trying to go? Okay, skills and tools in terms of food means, do they actually know how to plan a meal? I mean, this is not a basic, this may sound like a dumb question, but I have met certain people who just have never learned to really plan a meal. Their families ate on the run all the time, or they were just constantly grabbing whatever was at hand. The whole concept of how to put a meal together is not something they really understand how to do. And that, along with that, is cooking. I mean, basic skill. How do you prepare a meal? More than just using your microwave, which is a legitimate way to cook. I'm not saying it isn't, but the basics of how to, say, prepare pasta, scramble an egg, steam a vegetable, whatever it is pretty important. Along with that, grocery shopping, it sounds silly, but just understanding how to set up a list and go to the store, all these things matter. So if people don't have the skills that they need to meet these goals that they have, that has to be addressed first. I'll tell you one that I address a lot when I talk to people, and that's fallback meals. Let me talk a little bit about that. So everybody has their plan, right? Okay, I've got this goal. I'm going to eat this many vegetables every day, and I'm going to go to the gym 25 times a week, and I'm going to do this other thing. Okay, great. The real thing is, what happens when your plan goes haywire? Do you just hang up your gym shoes for the next 6 weeks because I failed once, forget it? Or do you come up with a different way to get a little exercise that day as opposed to going to the gym? Like maybe you do extra flights of stairs. Maybe you walk around the parking lot a few times before heading home. When it comes to food, do you have 2 to 3 meals in the back of your mind that you can easily put together from whatever happens to be in your pantry? This is critical. Okay, so maybe you wanted to prepare that healthy salmon meal with the, couscous and the whatever. Great. If that couldn't happen because you got home and were so hungry, or your client gets home and they're so hungry on a regular basis that they're going to inhale the first thing they come to on their counter, that's not good. But if they know instead, hey, I can make a meal in 2 minutes, and that will be better for me than eating from this bag of snacks. Okay, so let me give you some examples that I consider to be fallback meals. All right, cereal, milk, and fruit. Okay, tortilla pizzas is what I call them. You take a tortilla, spread a little stuff, little cheese and vegetables on it, throw it in the under the broiler in the microwave. You got dinner. Scramble some eggs with chopped vegetables, toast, and fruit. How about some hummus, carrots, and a toasted bagel? How about some canned vegetable soup? Okay, there's some good ones out there with pasta, crackers, or bread, or a sandwich. Or how about just good old-fashioned microwave meal or 2? Are these perfect? Of course not. But are they good? Yeah, they're good enough. And they're better than eating, 800 calories of some food or some snack food just because you were so hungry and hadn't had time to eat that day. And again, remember what I also said is the best thing is eat throughout the day. Don't get excessively hungry. So you can actually be mindful about what you're going to eat as opposed to just inhaling whatever comes toward you. All right, back to skills. If people do not have the skills, well, I got a slight answer for that might be funny. A few years back for the Wheat Foods Council, I made a bunch of cooking videos in my kitchen. So these recipes are actually done in my house. They're short, quick, and things that can be done. I'll let you find those, okay? They're pretty good, if I do say so myself, and I have eaten all of these things. I think they're fabulous. Anyway, all right, let's get back to goal setting. The fourth step of goal setting is monitoring progress. Now, I know, of course, we've got to monitor, but I have a few words to say about this. What we monitor, how we monitor it, and celebrating are all really important things to do, okay? First of all, if a client doesn't know much about calories and food, then it might be really helpful for them to use, say, an app like, MyFitnessPal or one of the other ones. And here's why. They can instantly see kind of what they're eating, where it's coming from, and kind of begin to learn where stuff is in food. My problem with MyFitnessPal and others is that I think they focus too much on the calories and the macros and not enough on the nutrients that we actually need to pay attention to as well. Vitamins A and C, vitamins D, calcium, iron. We need fiber. We need to pay attention to those. Those are just as important as those big calorie providing areas of the diet, okay? And that's just where I sit as a dietitian, and I'm standing by it. Anyway, apps also have another downfall, or just in general, clients need to be careful about this. They can make you very obsessive, almost wanting to be too perfect. Because just as, many people are used to video gaming and winning, people want to win their nutrition game. And I'm always like, look, you need to improve your nutrition game and keep mastering certain elements of it. There is no perfect. There are lots of diets or ways of eating, let me say that word instead, that are going to help us out long term. But there is no absolutely perfect diet. That's just not how it works. There's a lot of ways to get to where we're trying to be. And the apps can help you do that initially. But I think you eventually have to take it in, start to eat more intuitively, and monitor progress a little differently. Because, for example, I think you need to monitor what you need more of. So fiber, for example, vitamins A and C, calcium, more exercise. How do we monitor that? And also, how about we monitor a few other things like, did you plan meals for this week? How about, did you pack your gym bag? How many flights and steps are you taking this week? And, I just think these things matter. They're very important. And we have to celebrate and encourage our clients to celebrate those small steps that they're taking, even if they can't take them every day. When we congratulate ourselves for doing something right, and I'm saying literally, when we tell ourselves, hey, that was a good thing you did today, good job, that works. It really matters. We are so used to being, I don't know whether it's being an American or what, being self-critical. And I would argue with anybody that encouragement is 100 times more effective than self-criticism. And while you can do it as a promoter of health for your client, I also think we need to encourage our clients to do it for themselves, to remind themselves, hey, you're doing a good job. Keep up the good work. That's how you stay on the path. All right, let's talk about the fifth step of goal setting, evaluating those barriers, and hopefully beginning again. All right, because no matter who we're working with, barriers and obstacles to where people are trying to go in terms of goals, they're a given. You're going to run into obstacles all the time. It's how you choose to address those obstacles and whether you take a close look at why those things are obstacles that's going to determine whether you can keep moving forward with your process, okay? So as we already talked about, you need skills, You need, motivation. Okay. I assume people are motivated. Sometimes they get discouraged though. People get distracted though. It's really easy to get pulled off course by a life event or work event or anything. One that I think is a big problem is trying to be too perfect. I see a lot of people who actually really honestly feel I have to eat perfectly. I have to do this perfectly. And by God, I'm going to do it. And it gets them into trouble for a lot of reasons because they've either excluded a lot of things that really are not optional, or they've pretty much boxed themselves into a style of eating that's not sustainable for the long term and is going to hurt their health as well. Another barrier, too complicated. I've got to eat, my food has to be it has to be organic, this number of macros, no sodium, no sugar, and provide this much of everything. And you're down to like 3 foods, or, you don't even know how to prepare the food you're trying to include in your diet. That doesn't work. Things have to be simple. Boredom is another one. Taste is another one. You gotta like your food and your fitness routine, right? Clients have to like this stuff or they're not going to keep doing it. So they got to find what they like. And we have to make sure that the deprivation factor is almost non-existent or very low, because that is the one that over time gets everyone again and again. If you go on a diet, you're definitely going off the diet, and then all the progress you make often just goes with it. Not going to work. Now, all that said, to keep people on track, we know this, right? We need to encourage our clients to get support, get some help. Maybe they need a friend on board with this thing. Maybe they got to hire a professional. Maybe if they're already working with a fitness professional, they need to hire a nutritionist. If they're already working with a nutritionist, they need to hire a fitness professional or other kinds of professionals, All right. Keeping things simple, critical. All right. Meaning, it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be frozen meals. It can be canned soups. It can be sandwiches. I know these things are not perfect, but they are better than some of the other options that people turn to when they're seriously hungry and have no time. All right. But let's not forget meal services. If you can afford it, a meal service is a great way to go. All right. Now, the other thing I encourage people to do is make sure you know what works for you, meaning evaluate what's working, help your clients evaluate what's working, do more of it. All right. But I can't emphasize the get support part enough because that really helps. All right. Just about to wrap up here. Some final thoughts, okay, on this whole goal setting. In my mind, here's what really has to happen. People, everyone, we need to be realistic and evaluate appropriate changes and the skills required to make those changes, okay? It may not be helpful to focus only on I'm going to look great, etc., because again, we can't necessarily control how our body's going to respond to these things we throw at it. All right. We also need to focus on being realistic, not perfect. Okay. Because perfect is the enemy of good enough. All right. I think that we've really got to focus on processes. That's what's going to get us to our goals, not focusing on outcome goals. Focus on those little small steps, the habits, if you will, that are going to get you there. Make it a goal to develop the habit, not focusing on the endpoint. That will take care of itself. All right. Persistence, big one. There are a lot of ways to get to wherever you're trying to go, and a lot of ways for our clients to get where they're trying to go. Our job, I think, is to kind of help them explore those different paths, realize that you're going to try things several ways, several times before you finally get it right. And that's fine. Okay? That's fine. All right. And finally, I just want to say thanks for watching so far. We're not done yet. I'm going to check all the chat for some questions, etc. If you do want to send an email, though, or a question or check out more, I will encourage you to take a look at the wheatfoods.org website or send an email to wfc.srg.com. Okay. All right. Now, let me do this. Let's go into the chat here and see what's going on. All right. So, yes. Okay. Well, again, if anyone else has got some more stuff, send them in, but I'm going to answer these. So yeah, clients believe they're going to get fat eating wheat. I know that. There was a book called Wheat Belly a few years ago that I think really got that process going. And it was a shame. It was written by a cardiologist. It had about 1 billion references in the back, but when you really dug into the references and the guy who wrote the book, it was a complete nonsense sham. The arguments were not true or accurate, and there's a published paper in a peer-reviewed journal going exactly all through that. I can't help what people believe. I think that one of the things that people can say is that I'm going to get fat eating wheat, and when in truth they're going to get fat eating a lot of whatever they tend to eat a lot of. And if they happen to really enjoy a wheat-based food and that's their go-to, and they eat too much of it, they're going to get heavy. That's true of whether it would be rice-based or corn-based or whatever. So, or protein-based. I mean, I know it's hard to believe, but theoretically you can get heavy eating too much beef jerky or whatever. I can't argue with that. I can say that wheat provides a heck of a lot of nutrition, and yes, it does have calories. That is true of a lot of other foods. I think on balance, you always have to look at, again, the whole plate. What are you eating, besides wheat? People don't eat wheat in isolation, but if you go out to dinner and you've eaten, I'm just going to name a habit, 3 rolls before your dinner even comes, and then you eat the entire amount that you're served, when in fact most restaurants are serving enough for 2 to 3 people instead of 1. That's going to cause some problems. Was it really the wheat? I'm not sure. So that's a tough one. I think the habits that people use are important. Again, eating throughout the day, eating when hungry, understanding where they're trying to go with their food intake, focusing on a plate or a balanced, you can call it balanced meal, but whatever you want to say that comes from a lot of different food groups is going to help. All right, another question here. What are some examples of whole wheat foods that are high in fiber? Well, any whole wheat food is going to be high in fiber, but bread is probably one of the simplest ones. If you're eating toast for breakfast, or you have bagels or tortillas, they've got whole wheat versions of all of those. Also, not to put too fine a point on it, but if you've never eaten farro, which is just the wheat berry itself, takes about 40 minutes to cook. It's not a fast food, but if you throw it into a pressure cooker, you can cook it in about 5 to 10 minutes. It's pretty yummy, and it's not super chewy. It's got a lot of fiber as well. So all of those will provide fiber. All right, what else we got? So the question is, does eating healthier carbs earlier in the day decrease weight gain? I would argue that eating earlier in the day, period, helps weight gain. It's not just the carbs. Remember, we talked early on about the fact that calories come from at least 3 different places, if not 4, depending on if you include alcohol in your diet, okay? Any excess calories over time, even if it's just a small amount, like 200 to 300 a day consistently, is going to be stored as fat. It doesn't matter where those calories come from. So does eating carbs earlier in the day help? Sure, eating any food earlier in the day helps. But I would strongly advocate, if you were somebody who is awake during the daylight hours going to work, that is when your eating needs to happen. A little before work, a little at lunch, a little in the late afternoon, and some dinner, instead of saving it all for the end of the day. All right. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. So a question here about alcohol. No, alcohol is not inert by any means, and it is not like drinking gasoline. Alcohol is converted to a fuel, and okay, excuse me for my lack of biochemical knowledge. Somewhere on the Krebs cycle, it is converted to one of those intermediaries, and then it is broken down and burned as a fuel, okay? And it is not stored, meaning when you drink alcohol, all the alcohol in that drink has to be burned up immediately and will be preferentially used as fuel before your body is going to turn to the surrounding calories that it may have access to. Okay? That's how I understand it. It is not inert, it is not stored as fat, but it is a source of calories. And as I just said, well, there's a number of issues with alcohol. Usually when we eat alcohol, when we drink alcohol, excuse me, it's going to lower our inhibition. So let's say we are having drinks at the end of the day. Let's say we're again, I hear this a lot. Well, I knew I was going out that night, so I didn't eat much during the day. And then I got there and I had 2 beers right away. And then my whole plan went out the window and I just ordered whatever I wanted, or I just ordered food. But the bottom line is, as I just described, 2 beers, a whole bunch of restaurant food at night, not when you're burning calories, is not going to work. So what am I going to say? I think one of the biggest one of the things that people often don't want to adjust in their diets is their alcohol intake, but it is by no means inert. Yeah. Thanks for asking that question, by the way. Okay. What do you think? I think I answered everything in the chat room, unless anybody's got any more thoughts, questions? I hope I can hear. Hopefully you'll send me an email or something if you've got more. Let's see. Oh, here's another good one. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this. Is gluten intolerance, celiac disease, really as bad as in the news reports? Okay, here's the deal. Somewhere between 1% and 4% of the world's population is basically completely cannot handle gluten at all in any form, not just wheat, but in all the other places that gluten is, like, barley, etc. Can't have any gluten, and it is a complete meltdown within the digestive system. It causes leaky gut. It causes all kinds of things to get through the intestinal barrier that shouldn't. Inflammation, craziness, the immune system goes nuts. The bottom line is, when we eat protein, it needs to stay on the inside of our digestive tract, be completely broken down and used for whatever it's going to use. If we have leaky gut going on, meaning the junctions in between our intestinal cells open up a little bit. Remember, there's only a 1-layer barrier between the inside of us and our, blood, etc. It's very thin. And if gluten or other proteins start to leak through that barrier, the body reacts to foreign proteins like nobody's business. That is an automatic immune meltdown. So is celiac disease as bad as they say? Well, if you have celiac disease, it's bad. You cannot eat any wheat and you are very sensitive. And I'm not talking, you can have a little now and then. No, you can't have any. And avoiding it is really hard and it stinks. Ask anybody who has this disease for real, and not good. So it is not diagnosed just by saying I have a wheat intolerance, or it's not diagnosed by saying, oh, my tummy hurts when I eat wheat. It's diagnosed from, going to a doctor, having a genetic test or a biopsy or a blood test done. No, it is a real diagnosis. And if you get it, I am sorry, it's hard. Fortunately, there are a lot of gluten-free foods out there to eat. So you have options, but it is difficult. And it changes the nutrition profile of the diet. Now, does this mean that, 40% of the population out there should not be eating wheat? No, that is simply not the case. Now, that said, lots of people have digestive things going on. I'm just going to call them things. And the reason I'm going to call them things is because It's really hard to figure some of this stuff out. When people have irritable bowel syndrome, if people have sensitivities to certain types of oligosaccharides that are in fruits and vegetables or even grains, they can have gas and bloating and discomfort that is not fun. Then we also have another side issue. Some people do not respond well to lactose in dairy products. Another issue entirely. They don't have the enzymes to digest that. So these cause digestive things. You can't self-diagnose. I mean, the only thing I usually recommend people do is keep a very detailed journal when they're having episodes, what they ate. Don't assume it's what you just ate. Look back, usually 6 to 8 to 12 hours, and you may start to see a pattern. I've seen a lot of people where the real trigger for their IBS, for example, is not, wheat or dairy or some other bean. It's salt or something very, very, that brings a lot of water all at once into the digestive tract and causes problems. So anyway, I hope that answers the question, or at least begins to. All right. We're coming up on 1 o'clock here, Eastern time. I'm going to let you, if you've got any more questions, please send me an email. And I hope you'll tune in when we do this in the future, because we're hoping to bring you more of these. And thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it. Take care.